Martin, good afternoon. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. Lord Mayor, we are beginning to start the live stream. So we will be live in approximately 1 minute.
Susan, good afternoon. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Lubna, good afternoon. Can you hear us?
Yes.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, if I can ask the Lord Mayor to open the meeting.
Okay. It says live stream starting soon, so I will wait till that's. I'll start. So welcome everyone to this 8th of June meeting of full council. We have one substantive item on the agenda tonight, which is the discussion of Oxford Local Plan, adoption of the Oxford Local Plan 2036. I hope everyone's well and looking after themselves. I see we have a very full house, lots of images in front of me on the screen. And what a lovely lot you are as well. So we'll start off with apologies for absence. So Jennifer, do we have any apologies for absence?
We have apologies for absence, Lord Mayor, from Councillor McManus, and that's the only one that I'm aware of.
Right. Thank you very much. And so now we have declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest at all? I'll take silence as no. Jennifer, unless anyone's notified you of any declarations of interest. You're muted, so I take that as a no. Right, and okay, so now we have item 3 on the agenda, public addresses and questions, and we have one public address from Roy Dark, New Marston Residents Association, and people will find the text of his speech in the briefing note under agenda item 3. So Roy Dark, I think you will now be invited to speak for 3 minutes.
3 minutes? I thought it was 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm speaking not in a personal capacity, but as chair of New Marston Residents Association. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. Okay. Well, it's an association which has been around for 20 years, represents a small group of streets around what used to be the Somerset pub, which is now called the Up in Arms pub. And in a way, that renaming is indicative of the association's activity. It was opened after a big campaign by local people. Talking about the local plan, the association accepts the main thrust of the local plan, and particularly the urgent need for more affordable housing in Oxford. But we want to challenge one particular policy in the plan, which is the idea of developing at Park Farm, the home field, what I call the home field at Park Farm, which is currently in Greenbelt and largely within the functional floodplain of the River Cherwell. So our main objection, I think, to the policy being in the plan is on grounds of local and wider flood risk. People who live here know very well that the field is often underwater, it's flooded, and it also has standing water. And we feel this is a very bad idea for the local planning authority to include this in the plan. There has been presumption against building on functional floodplain for a long time, and we think that that ought to be accepted. We have objections to the technical work which was done to identify this site as suitable for development, because the authority used Wallingford Hydraulic Solutions to do an analysis. They said that there'd been never any flooding in the Oxford OX3 postcode area. And so on this conclusion, the authority believes, or that your planners believe, that Park Farm is suitable for development. The evidence base for that conclusion was given from the incident records of Thames Water Utilities, and we know that Thames Water is extremely unreliable in terms of its incident record. So we think the premise for designating the site as a flood risk zone, flood risk site, is flawed. We know that we're also in a period of extreme weather. The Met Office, Hadley Centre for Climate Science, has recently reported that climate today is totally different from what it was 30 years ago. The plan has a 16-year time period up to 2036, and heaven knows what the climate's going to be like in that period. So we think that there's a real problem with designating this field. We feel that the precautionary principle ought to apply. The government interestingly ripped up the precautionary principle in relation to the current crisis we're in with COVID-19. They didn't take all the actions which were suggested by a government-sponsored study in 2016, and we think that the city ought to be taking account of the precautionary principle in relation to this designation of Park Farm Field as suitable for development. The Secretary of State for the Environment, Jenrick, has said recently that after the flooding in the winter, that they were going to review the National Planning Policy Framework in relation to flood risk. And I suspect that that will actually say that even more than has been said in the past, that we shouldn't be developing here. The second reason for our view that Newmarston Meadows should not be built on and Park Farm Field is that it's a heritage biodiversity asset for the city. What we do in my paper, and I won't go into great detail, is that there is good scientific evidence for saying that.
30 seconds.
Sorry?
30 seconds.
Okay. For not building here, we also feel that there are good reasons for it as an important part of the green infrastructure of the city. So we are on those two main concerns, and it's laid out in my paper. I won't go on much longer, but we've raised these objections from the outset, and we feel that we've raised the issue properly throughout the planning process, and we've always been told we're too late and it's not appropriate. So I think that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dark. You've made your case very clearly, and I believe Councillor Hollingsworth was going to respond.
Yes, thank you very much. Obviously, the statement is not as written, so there are some additional things which weren't in the written statement, which I will try and respond to. I have had, in the last 30 seconds, the opportunity to look at the work done in preparation for the plan, looking at flood risk, and the statement that the flood risk assessment said there was no danger of flooding in OX3 is simply untrue, as my 30 seconds research told me, as it repeatedly refers to flooding incidents in the Newmarston area. So that apart, looking at the statement as it was circulated, the site in question has been the subject of careful consideration throughout the examination. The process of developing the local plan was subject to detailed examination by the inspectors. The site allocation, in conjunction with all the other policies in the local plan, was found sound. It is clearly understood and stated that some areas of the Park Farm site are in the flood zone, which I think rather disproves the allegation that the suggestion that the local plan says it isn't. And that is why detailed evidence on flood risk was prepared and consulted upon and put in front of the inspectors. The sequential flood risk test justified allocation of the site alongside the strategic flood risk assessment level 2. This includes consideration of potential climate change impacts. The level 2 assessment concluded that for this site, safe access and egress was possible as routes in and out keep dry. It also concluded that there may need to be significant mitigation and that a detailed flood risk assessment would be needed to demonstrate any proposed development would be safe and would not worsen flood risk elsewhere. The areas of highest flood risk within the site could not be built on. The presence of standing water does not in and of itself make a site undevelopable. Modelling and available technology to understand flood risk have advanced significantly. It is certainly the case that a great deal of work will be needed from any developer of this site to demonstrate that it is safe from flood risk and that flood risk is not worsened elsewhere, as is required by the other local plan policies which the inspector judged to be sound. Developers obviously will also need to liaise with Thames Water as early as possible with regards to assessing the impacts of development on the sewerage system, which obviously is an important local issue. The farm has been used for horse grazing, and initial biodiversity work has shown that there is unlikely to be significant biodiversity value within the site itself. The policy requires that development proposals demonstrate that there would be no adverse impact on the integrity of the nearby SSSI. Developers will be required to provide an assessment of groundwater and surface water flows and provide details of sustainable drainage schemes and an appropriate management plan. Whoever holds the lease on the land would be subject to the requirements for the management of the SSSI, and a new management arrangement would need to be developed if the current lease ends.
Okay, I think that's time. Thank you very much, Alex.
There is more if you want it.
No, I think time's been called, I think, by Jennifer, so
Yeah.
Apologies for that. Perhaps you want to circulate any more information around to members so they can see your full response. Thank you.
I can see that too.
Yeah, so I think we have a request for that. And so now we're moving on to item 4, which is substantive item, the adoption of the local plan. So members should have 4 documents in front of them. We have 2 paper copies of the plan. So this is the substantially large one and a smaller one, part 2. And also there's 2 electronic documents. There's the briefing note, which has, it's important because it has some errata in there, some detailed errata to the local plan. And there's also something only circulated today, which is the Cabinet recommendations, because the Cabinet met today and added an additional recommendation in, and that also contains a proposed amendment. So you should have those 4 documents. So I think, Alex, you're going to propose this item, and do we have a seconder? Councillor Tanner's seconder. So Alex, do you want to go ahead and propose?
Yeah, could you, before I start, Lord Mayor, can you advise me how many minutes I have?
The good question. As long as no one objects, I propose giving Alex more than the sort of constitutional 3 minutes, because I think this is a substantive item. And so as long as you don't speak excessively, I'm happy to allow you up to 10 minutes, but please don't use all of those 10 minutes unless you feel moved to do so.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I certainly won't. At the moment you think I'm excessive, you have my permission to mute me. The power is yours. Right, thank you very much indeed, Lord Mayor. But I want to begin by, first of all, putting on record my thanks to all the officers who worked on this plan over many months and indeed years, and all the members of the public who engaged with the consultation. The feedback we had in December from the inspectors about the way in which the plan was assembled and presented by the City Council's officers was extremely good. we were told that it was one of the most professionally presented plans that a very experienced inspector had come across. And I think that is a tribute to the skills, professionalism, integrity and dedication of the people who work for the City Council, and we are very lucky to have them. I will speak briefly in moving this local plan, because the council has discussed it several times over. But I think what I'd like to do is just pick up 2 or 3 key elements which were the subject of great debate going into the inspectors' hearings and at the public hearings themselves. The first was the issue of housing need. Now, we've all seen the repeated attempts to suggest that in some way that Oxford's housing need was being exaggerated and misstated. And I cannot put it better than the inspectors put it themselves in their report in refuting that. The situation in Oxford, with its stark inequalities and a very large and growing number of households unable to access market housing, clearly justifies the plan's approach. The plan's assessment of the overall housing need for Oxford, established at 1,400 dwellings per annum, is sound. The need is evidence-based and is founded on sound methodologies. And I hope that now we've had 5 years of debate over whether Oxford's housing need is, as we said it was, we can now take that as read and move forward. The other issue is is that of housing capacity, which obviously in this particular plan is lower than the housing need, and that is why we're working so closely with our neighbouring authorities. A great deal of work has been done to maximise the capacity in Oxford. Officers identified every potential site and more over a period of many months and years, and partly thanks to a government change of how one counts student housing, we were able in the final iteration of the plan to raise the capacity to 10,884 units to the end of the plan in 2036. Those who are good at maths will see the shortfall over that time is significant, but together with all our neighbouring local authorities, we've identified nearly all of that shortfall, sites for nearly all of that shortfall. We're able to, I think, move forward with confidence that we will be able to, over the plan period, working with our surrounding councils, deliver on the need for housing in the city. The plan also has a range of ambitious policies to tackle climate change and the climate emergency. And I want to emphasise that important though the council's declaration of a climate emergency was in 2019, it was not as if the council had done nothing up to that point, and this local plan bears that out. The local plan policies require new developments in Oxford to be 40% better than the national government targets on carbon emissions. And don't forget, this is a national government that has recently, just before COVID, consulted on taking away the ability of local councils to set targets in excess of national standards. So one risk of not adopting this plan is that we lose the ability to do what we have done here, which is to set those targets higher than the national standards. Those standards for Oxford will rise to 50% better than national standards after 2026, and in the case of new residential development, move to zero carbon from March 2030. We are also proposing what I think are probably the most far-reaching car-free transport policies, development policies of any local authority of our type in the country. Every development where they're within a controlled parking zone near bus routes and close to local shops will be car-free. So car-free developments will be the default not a special optional extra and an alteration from the norm. They will be the default. We're also focusing our development into district centres where we possibly can, looking at higher buildings, something which has been a very delicate balance with the important needs of the conservation and the heritage of the city, and the valuable view cones, and looking at increasing where we can the density of development. On our transport policies, we reiterate what we have long said, that the transport focus for Oxford has to be pedestrians and then cyclists, and then public transport in that order. And the inspectors endorse that when they say the city's ambition is to become a world-class cycling city with improved air quality, reduced congestion and enhanced public realm. To achieve this, there is a need to prioritise road space and to promote sustainable transport modes. And while it's not part of this plan, I think it's important to remind Council that the Connecting Oxford proposals and the zero emission zone are embedded in this local plan. This local plan assumes that they will go ahead. And I hope that working with the County Council, we will be able to deliver that and make sure that those are not just paper promises. So those are some of the major issues which the plan addresses. We have had, as people will be aware, a couple of setbacks, and those are set out in the report which is in front of you, specifically, and I think of greatest regret to me that the government's changes to the NPPF for small sites meant that our policy of pursuing social housing contribution on those smaller sites was no longer viable, no longer acceptable, and was removed from the plan on the requirement of the inspectors. We still have policies which prioritise social housing within the plan. And just as a reminder of those policies, for larger sites, 50% of housing must be affordable, and of that 50%, 80% must be social rent, in other words, council housing. I know that Councillor Tanner has been inquiring after the policies of our neighbouring authorities. South Oxfordshire requires a smaller percentage of social housing than we do, and none of our neighbouring authorities other than South Oxfordshire require any social housing at all. That's something which I hope that we will be able to persuade them to change. But that is an important part of our existing planning policy, which we have retained under some pressure from those who objected at the hearings. So I think I will pause there. I've flagged some of the important issues which are retained within the plan and the ways in which it is a radical, far-reaching plan which sets out a vision for the future of the city while recognising and respecting its historic past. But most of all, it's a plan about delivering housing, not just for the sake of bricks and mortar, but as homes for people who desperately need it. And because of that, I commend it to you and ask you to adopt.
Thank you very much, Alex, for that succinct introduction. I'm sure all members will want to echo your thanks to officers and contributors to the local plan. Councillor Tanner, I have you down as seconder. Do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
Yes, please, Lord Mayor. I'd like to speak now, if I may.
Yes, you can go ahead. 3 minutes, I'm afraid.
Lord Mayor, good evening, and good evening, councillors. I'm very grateful to Lockdown for enabling me to plough through this wonderful document, and it really is a remarkable blueprint for recovery as we come out of the lockdown and this dreadful pandemic. And as Councillor Hollingsworth says, Lord Mayor, it's about inviting investment in quality jobs, in homes for all, and in moving rapidly to zero carbon, which I really applaud. I know in my own ward of Littlemore, we've got support for the Cowley branch line. We've got the Armstrong Road housing, 270 units. We've got the Northfield hostel, the disused Northfield hostel being put over to housing in the scheme, perhaps 30 units. It really is excellent news. And we have been labouring under a lot of difficulty because of the restrictions put on by the government in their national planning policy framework. But I really want to congratulate the Cabinet and Councillor Hollingsworth, and indeed our officers, on bringing this plan through. It's a green plan, it's a fair plan, and it's a robust plan, and I commend it to the Council.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tanner. So we have an amendment to the Cabinet recommendations, which have been proposed by Councillor Wolf, and I believe Councillor Gant is going to be seconding. So you'll find that on your additional papers that were circulated today. So it's at the bottom where it says B amendment and item 5. So there are 4 recommendations from Cabinet, and this is a proposed additional 5th one. So Councillor Wolf, do you wish to propose?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I will. Let's just get it on. So the point of the amendment, I mean, let's just say the first thing is we acknowledge that we've reached a great milestone. Immense thanks to the officers for hours of work, patient work on this thing, bringing it to this point, which is great. And we've reached a great milestone here. The point of the amendment is to say, not that we've reached the end of a journey, we've reached an important milestone. The journey is, of course, never finished. The Cabinet, I believe, has accepted that the new plan that we will have is a launch pad for the next stage of the journey, not the final splashdown at the end of it, even though I'm sure many officers feel that it is. They'll be pleased to put it to bed. So, having paid tribute to them, the first part, Amendment 4, which Cabinet's adopted, I think, already recognises that the work of developing a coherent spatial strategy for the whole of Oxfordshire will continue, and we will continue to play our part in that, and we need to plan that in. Our last Amendment 5 there, I'm keen, is that we do remind ourselves of what this journey is that we're on, and which this local plan is a milestone towards, and acknowledge also the really significant developments that have happened since this plan was finalised. As it says, the new thinking which we need to be taking on board in our ongoing development of planning policy from this point on. The key things that have happened, climate emergency motion, citizens assembly, etc., they're widely known, and the remaining part of the amendment 4, which I'm asking your support for, spells those out. It will be good for the people of Oxford to be reminded of the journey that we are on, a journey towards a zero carbon future, to know that we're not intending to stand still, but we know, don't we, from the Citizens Assembly that the public wants us to push onwards. I learned today that there's been a 4,500% increase in the number of Google searches on how can I live a sustainable lifestyle. The coronavirus crisis has opened many minds to new priorities and opportunities, and that's what this amendment's about. You may be told that simply by looking ahead, we're somehow undermining the plan. I'm going to be supporting the plan. It's a really good piece of work, very thorough. You wouldn't tell a just married couple that by making new plans, they were undermining their marriage. So I hope councillors will be willing to acknowledge that our resolution does conclude an important stage on our journey, milestone. We need still to be developing policies to meet the enormous and daunting climate challenge ahead.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wolf. Councillor Gant, you wish to speak now, or always hold your right to speak?
I'll reserve my right to speak later, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. So now we're entering debate on that amendment, and I have Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. First of all, I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that Councillor Wolf said that there was a revised timetable. The point of the recommendation from Cabinet in front of you is that the timetable isn't revised. I've repeatedly told scrutiny, I've told Cabinet, I've told the Climate Change Review Panel, And moreover, I have repeatedly told full council that this is the timetable for the next local plan, not the current one, the next local plan. All I am doing with the cabinet recommendation is reminding you that that was going to happen already. It is always slightly galling to be told by Councillor Wolf to do something I'm already doing, but I will forgive him this once. The more serious point is the suggestion from Councillor Wolf that we disregard the officer advice which has been put in front of all councillors. It's all well and good congratulating the officers on their work on the local plan, and I'm delighted that Councillor Wolf was able to do that. It does seem then perhaps a little churlish to then go on to say that a really critical piece of advice from them isn't something that members should pay any mind to. So just in case people have not seen it, on the document, the final document circulated today, it says, Head of Planning Service advice on the amendment proposed by Councillor Wolf. It is the advice of officers that the amendment to the Cabinet recommendations put forward to full council implies that the local plan is deficient, for example, in relation to addressing climate change. Officers recommend that council does not include this amendment as it could undermine the local plan. The local plan is supported by extensive evidence and has been examined and found sound by the planning inspectors. Now, those are words which are not offered lightly. We very rarely have advice from officers on recommendation on amendments put forward by councillors. Normally we're left to chew the fat ourselves on issues like that. So I think we do need to take it extremely seriously. We've spent 4 years developing this local plan. It includes far-reaching policies. It would be, I think, deeply damaging and deeply discourteous to the officers who worked on it if at the very outset we undermine it, weaken it, and make it easier for developers to find loopholes in it and to disregard it entirely. And I will finish by reminding councillors that only this weekend the government were flagging that they may take planning powers completely away from councils. So I need to make sure that we take our local plan that we have, embed it, and make sure we support it fully rather than undermine it at the first instance.
That's time. Thank you very much. And Head of Law and Governance, Anita Bradley, wanted to chip in and give us some advice, legal advice.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just to reiterate part of what Councillor Hollingsworth just said there in relation just simply to the officer advice, that it's the amendments being allowed onto the papers because it isn't in itself unlawful, but unlawful and unwise are two separate things. And it is felt by officers that to approve a local plan and then to suggest that it may be deficient in relation to one element or another would be not a sensible thing for council to do.
Okay, do you have anyone else wishing to speak on this? Obviously, I've noticed that you've reserved your right to speak, Councillor Gant. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? I don't see any blue hands raising. Councillor Gant.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Wolf. Just, if I may, Dick has the opportunity to respond, but I mean, I'm sure without putting words into his mouth that he would want to stress that there is not the slightest intention to offer anything in the way of discourtesy or indeed undermining to the efforts or the work of officers. It seems to me that the amendment does exactly what it says. And it seems to me to be difficult to disagree with the intent of it. Without wishing to get into a technical debate, which I'm sure Anita will correct me if I say anything wrong, but again, the statement that amendments don't often attract the advice of officers is also incorrect. All motions and amendments are read by officers and are either deemed to be acceptable or not. And this one has been deemed to be acceptable. It is advice like Alex. I take Adrian's advice with the very greatest of seriousness, but at the same time, it seems to me that there is nothing to disagree with in the amendment, and I will be supporting it.
Councillor Wolf, do you wish to sum up? So I have no one else wishing to speak.
I think I'll just say that I find the advice most peculiar. You know, how looking forward can somehow undermine what has the great achievement that's been made. I simply cannot see it. We know that it's an important milestone. We know that tomorrow is a different day. And it's just saying that we're not closing the door. And I think the public will be expecting us to say something like that. You know, I'm actually quite offended at the suggestion that I'm trying to undermine the local plan. That's all I can say. It's a nonsense.
Right. Okay, so I think we now move to a vote on the amendment. So Jennifer, you're going to lead us through the vote, and it's a named vote as previously.
Yes, Lord Mayor. Would you like me to put up on screen, if I can, the amendment on which we're voting, or are you happy that everyone is sure about it?
I think that would be helpful to put it up on screen since it has been circulated late.
Bear with me just a second.
And also it's helpful because you've also got the fourth recommendation that's new from a cabinet. So when we get to that part of the vote, it would also be useful to have that.
Take a minute to see.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Right, so you can see the cabinet recommendations, and in blue highlighted the amendment on which we're voting.
Yeah, thank you. So everyone's clear. We're not voting on this on 1 to 4. That comes next. We're now voting on the area, the text that's highlighted by Jennifer.
Okay, and I'll take this as a roll call vote in alphabetical order, starting with the Deputy Lord Mayor. So when I call your name, if you can unmute your microphone and say whether you are voting for the amendment, against, or abstaining. Councillor Altaf Khan, how do you vote?
For.
For. Councillor Arshad? Do we have Councillor Arshad? No. If I miss anyone, please shout at the end. Councillor Azad, for, against, or abstain?
Against.
Against. Councillor Aziz?
Against.
Councillor Bailey Summers?
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Brown?
Against.
Against. Councillor Chapman?
Against.
Councillor Clarkson?
Against.
Councillor Cook?
Against.
Councillor Corries?
Against.
Councillor Curran? Councillor Curran? Are we here? Councillor Jafari Marbini?
Against.
Against. Councillor Donnelly?
Against.
Councillor Fry?
Against.
Councillor Gant?
For.
Councillor Garden?
For.
Councillor Goddard?
For.
Councillor Gotch?
For.
Councillor Haynes? Councillor Mick Haynes? Councillor Harris?
For.
Councillor Hayes?
Against.
Councillor Henwood?
For.
Councillor Hollingsworth?
Against.
Councillor Howlett?
Against.
Councillor Humberston?
Against.
Councillor Eiley Williamson?
Against.
Councillor Kennedy? Councillor Kennedy?
Against.
Against. Councillor Landell Mills,
4.
Councillor Lloyd Begson,
Against.
Councillor Lygo,
Against.
Councillor Malik,
Against.
again against, Councillor Munkongi,
Against.
Councillor Pressel,
Against.
Councillor Rowley,
Against.
Councillor Rush,
Against.
Councillor Sim,
Against.
Councillor Simmons,
4.
Councillor Linda Smith, Councillor Linda Smith, Councillor Roz Smith,
4.
or Councillor Tanner,
Against.
Councillor Tarver,
Against.
Councillor Taylor,
Against.
Councillor Tidball,
Against.
Councillor Turner,
Against.
Councillor Upton,
Against.
Councillor Wade,
4.
and Councillor Wolfe.
4.
Have I missed anyone who has appeared since? Councillor Arshad,
Against.
against? And anyone else?
And it says Councillor Curran was also.
Councillor Curran,
Well. Councillor Mick Haynes as well.
yep. Councillor Curran, can you tell us your vote? He might have gone. And Councillor Mick Haynes. Councillor Haynes, are you able to tell us your vote?
No. If Jennifer, I think those people were in attendance, and if they're able to put up their sort of blue hand, if they're able to do that, even if they can't unmute, then we can see how they were in intending to vote. 4 at least.
Yep, I have. So I'm looking for votes from Councillor Curran.
So Councillor Curran has raised his blue hand. 4.
4.
Anyone
No.
against? Who hasn't already spoken?
I think Councillor Curran is shaking his head.
He's against then. When I did say 4 and he raised a hand, okay. So
and Councillor Linda Smith.
Against.
Against.
maybe Councillor Curran could be permitted to use the chat to convey his intended vote to you, Jennifer. Okay, thank you for that.
Right, Lord Mayor, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in support, 2 abstentions, and the rest against. So that is lost.
So that amendment falls. Thank you very much. We now move to the debate on the substantive item, which is the recommendations on that sheet, A1 to 4 that Jennifer just showed you. That's a sheet that was circulated later, noting the additional recommendation from Cabinet. So does anyone wish to speak on the substantive? I have Councillor Gant. I'm presuming Councillor Curran, your hand is still up from previously, and Councillor Wolfe. So I have those two people wishing to speak. Councillor Gant first.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. First of all, I'd just like to join other speakers in congratulating and thanking our officers very much for their dedicated work over a long period of time. Anybody who's tried to navigate their way through the local plan homepage will know how many, probably millions of words, not to mention documents, have gone into it. So my thanks to them as well. to deal with some of the issues, to say that the numbers have been found sound doesn't mean that they're right. It does not make you anti-housing or anti-growth to question whether adding 50% to the size of our city is right for our city. We have heard about transport policies. We welcome them, but the people of Oxford are entitled to look at delivery of our council and its partner in the county over recent years to judge if this is a sustainable and appropriate approach. I would say in my ward, it is not. We've been told that it is tied closely to plans like Connecting Oxford, which has a major flaw in the distribution of the proposed workplace parking levy. We would like to see greater commitment to car-free development and greater ambition and vision for replacing low-density housing. We find a disconnect between the stated ambition to reduce car use and protecting car parks. We certainly welcome the high policy target for affordable housing, but again, the people of Oxford are entitled to look at delivery on big sites over recent years. We have consistently queried the balance that this plan has placed on between housing and employment sites. And once again, querying that balance does not, and I must repeat that, does not make you anti-jobs or anti-growth. But it is important to look at the record. Our own recent corporate plan update set itself 3 targets for employment and missed all 3 of them by some considerable way. Our science parks have not been fully occupied. Much of them is given over to car parks, and they are to a large extent segregated from their neighbouring local communities. A truly mixed and cohesive city should be looking to break down these barriers. There should be more to encourage businesses which rely on their employees attending by car to help us regenerate our city centre. We shouldn't block ourselves in by explicitly blocking other uses, in addition to, if necessary, employment on many sites. We don't, it is true, have an obvious big site like the Marshalls Airfield in Cambridge, which some members may be familiar with, but there are parts of our city on radial routes close to the city centre which are occupied by large businesses designed to be attended by car. Where is the strategy? Where is the vision? And of course, as other speakers have said, particularly Councillor Wolf, this plan can't be read in isolation from our neighbours and our region. Government continually stresses policy protection for the green belt, but the cumulative effect of the policy assumptions underlying this plan are that we are going in the opposite direction. We would have welcomed more detail and vision for our vital high-tech sector. The need to align local plans has been acknowledged, and the Oxfordshire 2050 plan is becoming increasingly relevant, as are other regional and supra-regional plans and bodies. There are things here that we would have liked to do better, and there are things we need to do better going forward.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gant. I have Councillor Wolf and Councillor Henwood have indicated. So, Councillor Wolf.
Me too, Chair, if you will.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Thank you. The council has a responsibility not just to represent, but to lead. The time lag on getting planning policy adopted means that we're always in danger of playing catch up with where we need to be, and increasingly where the public want us to be. Officers who are defensive about our new local plan will interpret what I'm going to say as undermining it, and that's already been said. I'm not going to undermine it. I'm going to vote for its adoption because I think it is a very good plan, and I'm very grateful for the work that's been done on it. But I'm also going to say, and it won't come as a surprise, that it's not the plan the Green Party would have liked to see. If you were to read our extensive submissions to the consultation process, you'd know that there are aspects of it that we feel are inadequate, where our requests for modifications haven't been accepted. Not surprising, but that's how it is. In the time available, I can only really draw attention to one of them, but it's an important one. Policy RE1 sets the bar for the thermal efficiency of new buildings, and it sets it too low. It's much better than it was, of course, but it's still too low. The Citizens' Assembly, which met well after Policy RE1 was formulated, was unanimous when it said it made no sense to permit new builds that added to the city's carbon footprint for the next 60 years, actively working against our declared policy on carbon emissions. It made no sense. That was a unanimous statement from the Citizens Assembly. We said we'd honour it. Now, the inspector's report in, just check it out, paragraph 110, has reminded us that we always had the ability to set higher minimum standards, provided we could show that it wouldn't prevent us delivering on our housing targets because the build cost rendered schemes unviable. That was the constraint, but we had the ability to do it. Maybe when the policy was being formulated, you know, that made it unviable. However, officers did a fantastic piece of work, submitted a detailed and good case that policy RE1 would not have that effect on viability, and the inspectors have accepted it. So our thanks are due to officers for that. But they've hinted, the inspectors, that better may be possible. At least that's how I read their report. I'd like, of course, to think that it was because they were impressed by the detailed argument the Green Party submitted that because of the high land values in Oxford, unique really in the country, even if we were to set passive house standards as the minimum build standard, developments would still be viable. The building industry is moving on. I'm happy to make that paper available to members. So I want to flag up that in our opinion, great plan, but we can do better on minimum standards. And it's one of the first things we need to be looking at. And I think things have been said in the council chamber that actually recognise it. This is not to undermine the plan. It is what it is, but we need to be moving on. One thing I would say also, thank you, in conclusion, is I am concerned that having adopted this plan, what are set down there as minimum standards may be interpreted as the maximum standards and close down the ambition to build better, even when the city council itself is the developer, as it will be in Blackbird Leys. So I hope it's understood that these are absolutely minimum standards.
So, Councillor Henwood.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Again, to officers, I think there's a great deal of work being done here, and I am truly grateful for that. My concerns are there is our attitudes towards the car. I am indeed against the combustion engine. I am, however, in favour of sustainable vehicles, and that may include hydrogen-driven cars or even electric cars. I think those forms of transport there is a room for in a future in Oxford. I don't necessarily believe that car-free developments will be the answer to everybody's means of getting into Oxford. A family of 4 travelling from Cowley to Oxford cost £11.40 by return. I mean, that's simply unaffordable. The Cowley branch line, we've no idea whether this will truly be a sustainable means of transport for everybody. It may be very expensive. I hope it's not. I hope we can all use it, and I hope it will be sustainable. What I have problems with in the local plan, there's no glossary. So we don't know what we mean by the word sustainable. Simply by looking at the word sustainable, what does it mean by an outsider looking at our report? Exactly what do we mean by that? As you've heard me before, I am against the combustion engine. That doesn't mean to say that I'm against the car. I think there is room for it, and I think there is a need for it in certain cases. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Gotch.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I want to address the question of the slow delivery of buildings with a zero carbon footprint in this plan, which I think it generally has a great deal to commend it, but this is one aspect of it that it is not. It's not news to anybody in Oxford that 80% of our energy in Oxford goes on building, heating and lighting and ventilation of buildings. It's no surprise that our existing buildings are terribly energy inefficient, and it's difficult and expensive to amend them, to remedy those defects to standards of insulation and energy conservation and airtightness that are needed to ameliorate some of the results of climate warming. New buildings, on the other hand, can be and are much easier to build with a zero carbon footprint. And we have examples of that near to Oxford. The Citizens' Assembly and the Climate Emergency Report last year both advocated speedy action. And government has continued, or confirmed 3 years ago anyway, that the local authorities could set their own energy usage standards. And the inspectors underlined that point. We could do that in Oxford. Yet this administration, its local plan to 2036, allows builders and developers 10 years grace to produce buildings that do not contribute as much as they could towards ameliorating climate change. And that 10 years, in fact, stretches is much more than that, because in fact, by the time you've done your detailed planning, building regs, tenders, and the build period itself, it'll be 13 or 14 years that we'll be producing substandard buildings quite unnecessarily. The administration, and it was generally supported, declared a climate emergency in Oxford. And it declared a few streets in the centre as zero, although actually they were just low emission zones. But why is it so tardy towards speeding up the need for builders to submit applications for all types of buildings, not just houses, but all types of buildings that actually make a much greater contribution towards reducing the carbon footprint of all of our buildings? My suggestion is that the opposition members, we are few, so we are dependent on what the government's, the administration's own backbenchers can do to push their cabinet towards insisting that the 10-year period is reduced substantially. I'd suggest tentatively bring it down to 2 years perhaps, but with it, any buildings beyond 2 years from now have to be, when they're applied for, have a carbon neutral footprint, and only by that means can we actually meet some of the desperate need that is needed to reduce the carbon warming effect of substandard buildings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Brown, then I'm proposing to move to Councillor Hollingsworth for summing up. Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I will be brief. I'm just wanted to draw attention to the fact that opposition councillors will be very aware that the city pushed very, very hard indeed to get the highest possible environmental standards as part of this report. And on a note that Councillor Wolf referred to the submission that the Green Party made to the local plan without actually recognising the fact that it was in fact rejected by the local plan inspector. So I think that it's important to recognise that we are working within the planning framework that we have to work within, and that we are looking to get the highest possible environmental standards. So I wanted to recognise the work of our excellent planning officers and to thank everyone involved in the local plan. I think it is an excellent local plan, and I think it's actually very ambitious, and it should be, and it's very important that we don't forget that not only are we pressing hard on environmental standards, but that we are also pushing hard and continue to do so on the delivery of social housing for our city. And never has it been more important than it is at the moment, when we're seeing, very sadly, increases in homelessness and insecurity for people in terms of their economic status. So I commend the report to you.
Thank you. I did say that we'd move to Councillor Hollingsworth because there were no hands up at the time I invited Councillor Brown to speak. Now we have 2 more hands which have come up. 3 more hands. This is going to be a bit silly. We did have all that time to raise your hand if you wanted to speak against this item. You've had the local plan for a long time. I will take the 3 people who've put their hands up, but really no more after that, and we'll move to Councillor Hollingsworth. So I have Councillor Malik.
I like to start thanking not just the current leadership and the portfolio holder and the interim head of planning, but obviously the former leader Bob Price and former portfolio holder Colin Cook and former other head of planning people. So just to say, in my opinion, these local plans are marathon rather than a sprint. It takes a very long time to come, and you have to get everything right. where I'm very delighted to endorse this and vote for this local plan. I mean, I have an opinion where many agree or not, but I hope in the next review, when we come into it, we'll look into it further afield where we currently allocating these housing sites. I mean, in my point of view, we could have been more bold and ambitious to look into further land where you have 3 development land with a farm and the council owned lands. So altogether maybe 70 odd acres sitting there, where only I think we are occupying this time probably 15 acres and on. So I don't think so anybody denies the pressure, severe pressure we have on the housing and the need in the city. So all the other people, I mean, they have their reservation and they're making the points. I think when the next review starts, our work starts then, and we can have all these things in the documented and debated, rather than, in my point of view, just debating when we're about to sign it. So I'll ask the other to vote for it and adopt the local plan. Thank you.
Councillor Tanner next. You have already spoken, so if you could be brief, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. But I think it's important that councillors read the report before they start putting down amendments. And it was claimed that there was no glossary about an environmentally sustainable city. But if councillors like to turn to page 9 of the proposed plan, they will see that that's exactly what there is, right in the middle of the page there. It defines it in some detail as to what an environmental sustainable city is. And then somebody says we're not moving fast enough to zero carbon homes. Of course, we'd like to see national government doing more, but if we look again at the report on page 68, right at the top of the page there, it says that after the 31st of March 2030, planning permission will only be granted for developments, etc., which are zero carbon. And, you know, it's 2020 now, and we're also talking about steps towards that between that 2020 and 2030. So Councillor Wolf and others will get what they want at that stage. I think he's right that it would be nicer if we could get it sooner, but for goodness sake, we're up against the building lobby, we're up against the government, and I think to have achieved this is remarkable. And so I hope people will take note of that.
Thank you very much. And final speaker before I get turned to Councillor Hollingsworth is Councillor Cook.
Yes, just to say that there is a definition of sustainable development on page 232 set out in the glossary. I'm sorry if Councillor Henwood hasn't got that paperwork or has a different copy to me, but I hope he can have a look at it there.
Okay, thank you very much. I did make it very clear I'd move to Councillor Hollingsworth to sum up. I have had more hands go up, but that's all we have time for. So Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you very much, and thank you for those people who've answered the points about the glossary, which I knew was there somewhere. Picking up the points raised in kind of roughly reverse order, Mike Gotch is essentially speaking on behalf of an amended plan. I think we're pretty clear we can't amend the plan. I would remind him that while the inspector did confirm that we can now set our own standards, it's only a small number of years ago that Vince Cable, when he was in government, stopped us doing so and described the ability of councils to set their own standards as red tape, as part of the Deregulation Act, which he was the key proponent of. So it's always nice to see a convert, and I hope that the current government, who appears to be wanting to get rid of planning full stop and just have some kind of free-for-all, leaves us with a system that's something intact. I wanted to pick up the point about the cars, and I imagine that may have been what one or two other people wanted to speak on, who you've skipped over, Lord Mayor. I agree that hydrogen and electric cars give us an opportunity to address some of the problems that stem from car traffic, but they certainly don't stem all of them. A Conservative county councillor with whom I've had many meetings is fond of saying there's no point replacing a traffic jam of diesel cars with a traffic jam of electric cars. It's still a traffic jam, and they're still just as dangerous and off-putting and threatening if you're on a bike, and they're still just as unpleasant when you're trying to cross the road, and they still have the impacts on communities of all cars. So no, I am very happy with the proposals that we're putting forward here. We need to be looking at a city which has fewer cars driving around in it. I think that's absolutely critical for making this a sustainable city in the broadest meaning of that word. Councillor Wolf, I know, is always extremely keen to find meaning in other people's texts, which perhaps wasn't there, though he did get very upset when people found meaning in his text that he didn't intend to put in there, and I agree he didn't intend it. The important thing when a plan is undermined, it's not our officers feel that he has some kind of personal vendetta against them and are all offended that he's telling them that he doesn't like their work. The point is that it has a legal meaning and makes the plan less effective and less deliverable, and that's the issue, not that officers felt it was undermined. I have to say that in reading paragraph 110 of the inspector's report, one, it does not say we could always set our own targets. I've already explained that. It's just not true, and nor does it, I think, even in the most optimistic wording, imply we could go further. Any effort to go further in the next local plan iteration will depend on evidence, evidence of viability, which I know Councillor Wolf enjoys engaging with. I've seen him do so in the planning committee, and I look forward to his detailed engagement with it. And finally, if I could just finish, so I can cover everything. Sorry, I should have asked at the beginning how much time you were allowing me. The employment policies in the plan, responding to Councillor Gant, do increase density. They are on radial routes. They're all about avoiding car transport. And of course, in terms of replacing low density housing, the lowest density housing is in North Oxford. I shall look forward to Councillor Gant and his colleagues enthusiastically continuing to support the replacement of low density housing in their area with higher density developments. I know in the Summertown ward there's some sites which are ripe for that kind of approach, and that is positively encouraged in the plan. So with that, I conclude, and I ask you all to adopt the plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, your reference to people who wanted to speak, who I didn't allow. At the time I did the cut-off, I did allow everyone who had the blue hand up. I had one late person put their hand up, but I did at the time allow everyone who had their hand up. So now we move to a vote, and I think, Jennifer, you're going to lead us through that voting process, which is the same as before.
Yes, Lord Mayor, it will again be a vote where I will call out your names, and if you can indicate whether you're voting for the 4 recommendations from Cabinet, against, or abstaining. And if you're having problems with your microphone, when I get to your name, if you want to put in the chat which way you are voting, and then I will read out at the end anyone that I didn't manage to get a vote from. So if I start off again with Deputy Lord Mayor, with Councillor Altaf Khan, are you voting for, against, or abstaining for the 4 recommendations?
Against.
Councillor Arshad?
For.
Or Councillor Azad?
For.
Or Councillor Aziz?
For.
Or Councillor Belly Summers?
For.
Or Councillor Brown?
For.
Councillor Chapman?
For.
Councillor Clarkson?
For.
Councillor Cook?
For.
Councillor Corres?
For.
Or Councillor Curran? For. Councillor Jafari Murbini? Come back. Councillor Donnelly?
For.
For. Councillor Fry?
For.
Councillor Gant?
Against.
Councillor Garden?
Against.
Councillor Goddard?
Against.
Councillor Gotch?
Against.
Councillor Haynes. Councillor Haynes. So we'll come back. Councillor Harris.
Against.
Councillor Hayes.
4.
Councillor Henwood.
Against.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
4.
Councillor Howlett.
4.
Councillor Humberston.
4.
Councillor Eiley Williamson.
4.
Councillor Kennedy.
4.
Councillor Landell Mills.
Against.
Councillor Lloyd Bigson.
4.
Councillor Ligo. Councillor Ligo.
Sorry, 4.
Or Councillor Malik.
4.
Councillor Munkongi.
4.
Councillor Pressel.
4.
Councillor Rowley.
4.
Or Councillor Rush.
4.
Councillor Sim.
4.
Councillor Simmons.
4.
Councillor Linda Smith.
4.
Councillor Ros Smith.
Against.
Councillor Tanner.
4.
Councillor Tarver.
4.
Councillor Taylor.
4.
Councillor Tidball.
4.
Councillor Turner.
4.
Councillor Upton.
4.
Councillor Wade.
Against.
And Councillor Wolfe.
4.
And I need to just check from Councillor Haynes, and is Councillor Jafari Marbini still here?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, did you not get my vote?
I'm afraid I didn't, Councillor.
Sorry, I said 4.
4.
I thought you did. Thank you very much.
Okay. And Councillor Haynes, have we got sound? Yep. Okay, so Lord Mayor, that's 10 against. And 36 for, and 1 no vote.
Okay, well, thank you very much, meeting. I believe we have a new local plan. Thank you very much. That's all the items we have on the agenda. I don't think there's any we've missed out. Jennifer, is that everything?
No, Lord Mayor, I think that's us.
So thank you very much, everyone, for your time, and stay safe.
Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you,
Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you all.
Thanks.